That morning, the sun had just risen on the eastern horizon. The fresh air typical of the countryside felt so refreshing, replacing the dew that still clung to the green leaves. I stepped towards the expanse of rice fields, a journey that I had always looked forward to. A small path that divided the rice fields led me to the expanse of rice fields, where the beauty of nature seemed to blend in a harmony that soothed the heart. The first step in the expanse of rice fields felt like entering another world. On the right and left, expanses of green rice stretched as far as the eye could see, swaying gently in the wind. Dewdrops still stuck to the tips of the leaves, reflecting the sunlight to create a jewel-like sparkle. The distinctive aroma of wet soil mixed with the scent of newly grown rice plants gave a delicious sensation that was difficult to express in words. Occasionally, the sound of sparrows could be heard cheerfully, chasing the fields of rice fields. In the heart, drops of water flowed from a small irrigation channel that divided the rice fields into several plots. The farmers had started working, bending their bodies with great patience. They were like a living painting depicting the hard work and harmony of humans with nature. I continued walking, carefully maintaining my balance on the narrow ridge. My feet felt like they were touching soft ground, occasionally touching small puddles of air that had formed on the side of the ridge. On the other side, old coconut trees stood tall, their leaves waving as if greeting. There, a buffalo was seen enjoying the morning, occasionally wagging its tail to chase away flies. This view was not only pleasing to the eye, but also touching to the heart. I stopped for a moment, enjoying the panorama that stretched out before my eyes. The mountains in the distance looked majestic with their peaks covered in thin clouds. The blue sky stretched perfectly, some decorations of white clouds moving slowly. The soft morning wind brought whispers of nature, as if telling a story of fertility and life. The journey to the rice fields was not just a physical journey. This was a moment of reflection, a moment to be grateful for the simple beauty that is often forgotten. Here, amidst the peaceful green expanse, I felt connected to something bigger: nature, life, and the meaning of balance. This journey reminded me to appreciate every small step, because behind the limitations, extraordinary beauty is hidden. My purpose in going to the rice fields was to look for snails. This was quite tiring work, and this was one way to care for the plants in the rice fields, namely rice plants. In the middle of the rice fields, newly planted young rice plants began to show themselves. The small, bright green stalks stood upright, although still fragile. They grew in a regular pattern, creating a sight that was pleasing to the eye. The young, delicate leaves swayed gently in the wind, as if greeting the surrounding nature. With a caping hat protecting me from the hot sun, I walked slowly on the rice field embankments, checking every inch of soil and ensuring that water was flowing well throughout the land. Irrigation water flowed quietly through small ditches, bringing life to these young plants. The water was clear, reflecting the bright blue sky. Each flow of water seemed to carry a message full of hope, that these newly planted seeds would grow into sturdy plants and produce an abundant harvest. Around the rice fields, shady trees stood as guards, providing shade for farmers who were taking a break from their tiring work. The sounds of nature came together. The chirping of birds, the gurgling of water, and the howling of the wind whispering softly between the young rice leaves. These days were the beginning of a long journey for the rice plants. They will face the heat of the sun, the pouring rain, and perhaps strong winds that will shake their tiny bodies. However, just like the farmer who never gives up, these young rice will grow with determination, rooted firmly into the fertile soil. The expanse of rice fields planted with young rice is not only a beautiful sight, but also a symbol of life, hard work, and hope. Each stalk of rice carries the promise of a better future, not only for the farmer, but also for the many people who depend on this harvest for their livelihood. And here, amidst the stunning young green, nature and humans come together in harmony to create the miracle of life. A little story about snails. Although their bodies are small, the damage they cause can be very large. In just one night, they are able to devour young rice shoots that have just grown. The soft green leaves are their favorite food. When morning came, I could only see traces of damage. Rice plants that were previously standing upright were now lying down. Some even disappeared without a trace. I walked along the rice field embankments, observing carefully. In the rice fields that I deliberately did not flood, the snails seemed active, as if they did not care that their presence was a disaster for the rice plants. Some of them even left traces of mucus on the leaves they chewed, a clear sign that they had launched an attack. Young rice plants are very vulnerable to snail attacks. Their newly grown roots are not strong enough to survive, and their leaves that are still fresh green are easy targets. The snails move in small groups, spreading from one point to another, causing widespread damage. If these snails are left alone, the expected harvest can be drastically reduced, or even fail completely. The green rice field scenery slowly turned into an area with small holes, where the rice plants had been eaten by snails. Some farmers had tried various methods, from picking up the snails one by one to setting traps along the embankments. However, their numbers were so many, as if they would never end. I looked down. I thought, how could something so small have such a big impact on the lives of farmers who depend on their crops? With my spirit still burning, I continued to fight, hoping that my rice fields would recover and produce abundant results during the next harvest. The sun shone on the vast expanse of rice fields. The sky was bright blue, decorated with a few white clouds floating lazily. I stood on the rice field embankment, looking at the expanse of green rice fields stretching as far as the eye could see. A gentle breeze blew gently, carrying the distinctive aroma of fresh and calming rice fields. I had arrived at my rice field, ready to look for snails that usually hide in puddles of water between young rice plants. I took my first step carefully, making sure not to slip on the slippery ground. The sound of trickling water from the irrigation channel was clearly audible, as if welcoming my presence. In the distance, a farmer was seen bending over, tidying up the weeds around his plants. I greeted him with a smile, and he responded with a friendly wave of his hand. I began to observe carefully, checking the surface of the water and the muddy ground. With my hand, I was ready to pick it up and hope to find a snail hiding in the mud. It took a while before I finally saw something moving slightly at the bottom of the mud. Carefully, I picked it up with my hand, making sure it was indeed a snail. Sure enough, a brownish-shelled rice-field snail was in my hand. I put it in the bucket with a small smile on my face. One was enough, and I was ready to look for more. Over time, I began to get used to the texture of the mud on my hands and the distinctive wet smell. I kept moving from one spot to another, checking every corner of the puddle. Sometimes, I found 2 or 3 snails at once. Sometimes, I had to dig deeper because the snails were good at hiding. The warm sunlight now seemed to provide a warmer atmosphere. In between my work, I occasionally stopped to enjoy the surrounding scenery, a green expanse that was so soothing to the eyes, accompanied by the peaceful sounds of nature. I smiled a little, feeling grateful for this morning's sustenance. Life in the village is indeed simple, but it is always full of small beauties that are often overlooked. In the midst of the hustle and bustle of life, this rice field is a place where I can truly feel calm and at one with nature. I decided not to flood it this time so that the soil would remain firm, even though it would make it harder to plant and tend the rice. But one thing remained the same: the snails still showed up. They inhabit not only muddy or watery rice fields, but also dry soil like this, hiding in clumps of soil. Carrying a small bucket, I walked through the rice fields. I knew that looking for snails in dry rice fields was much harder. There was no puddle of water to reveal their tracks, no mud that could be easily stirred to find them. The snails were clever at adapting. They knew how to hide themselves in less favorable environments. I crouched in one corner of the rice field, my eyes keenly observing every corner of the soil. My left hand pried open a suspicious hole. There in the small hole I saw something shiny, a snail shell. Carefully, I picked it up. The snail seemed to move slowly, as if it had just woken up from hiding. I put it in the bucket and continued my search. Looking for snails in dry rice fields requires extra patience. I have to check behind every dry leaf, under the roots of wild plants, or between the stalks of rice that are starting to grow. Sometimes, I find 2 or 3 snails hiding together, forming a small colony. Sometimes, I have to walk for a long time without finding anything, only dry soil cracked by the heat of the sun. As I walk further, this atmosphere reminds me of my childhood, when I often helped my parents in the rice fields. Although difficult, there is something calming about this work. Direct contact with the soil, the calm sound of nature, and the sense of pride when seeing the results of hard work. After a few minutes, my bucket starts to fill up. Although they are considered pests, these snails still have value, if managed wisely. In my heart, I am grateful for what nature has given, even though it must be obtained with hard work. The sky is starting to turn afternoon, and the heat of the sun is getting stronger. I decide to stop for a moment, sitting on the rice field embankment while wiping off my sweat. The small bucket beside me is a witness to my struggle this morning. My dry rice field may look different from other rice fields, but this is where I learn to continue to adapt, just like the snails I seek. Life, like this rice field, always offers challenges. And in every challenge, there is always a valuable lesson behind it. New rice plants are not allowed to be flooded because watery rice fields are a paradise for snails. In this place, they find an ideal environment to live and breed. Abundant water provides them with shelter, abundant food, and perfect conditions to reproduce. Snails reproduce quickly, leaving small eggs on the surface of rice stalks, grass, or even on the walls of rice field embankments. Within a short time, the eggs hatch, producing a new generation ready to inhabit the rice fields. This cycle continues without stopping, making snails one of the most productive rice field inhabitants. However, behind the rapid reproduction of snails, there are challenges for farmers. Snails can be a threat to young rice plants, eating newly grown shoots and disrupting land productivity. Therefore, snail management is important to maintain a balance between their presence and optimal harvest results. On the other hand, snails also have benefits. They can be used as animal feed or alternative food ingredients. With wise management, the presence of snails in watery rice fields is not only a challenge, but also an opportunity for a more balanced life. After combing through the rice fields, brushing aside the mud, and looking for snails between the rice stalks, my body began to ask for rest. The sunlight felt warm on my skin. I wanted to rest for a moment to let my body and mind breathe freely. Under the shade of a tree on the edge of the rice field, I sat while looking at the expanse of green that seemed endless. In the distance, birds flew low, and the sound of trickling water flowed softly between the ditches. It felt peaceful, like nature wanted to speak, reminding me that there is beauty behind every effort. Looking for snails does require patience and energy, but I know that rest is also part of this journey. A moment to stretch my legs, enjoy the scenery, and realize how rich and full of life this place is. After this, I will return, fresher and ready to continue the search, because there are still many snails waiting to be found.